Welcome to the course. We're going to talk about, in this screencast, the basic features of Excel. I'm sure you'll learn quite a bit in this course. So let's look at some of the basic features of Excel. What version of Excel should or can you use? Well, Windows Excel 2019, Office 365, I'll talk about the differences between those two in the next slide, but those are the preferred formats for using Excel in this course. If you don't have Excel 2019, then Windows Excel 2016 will work just fine. If you do have Windows Excel 2013 or earlier, it sort of depends how early. I don't think most of this will work with Excel 1995, but 2013 or earlier will be mostly fine. But when you open up Excel, if you've never used this before, you see that it's a spreadsheet. You have all these cells that you can kind of click around, and this is where we can put things. So you can type in different words. So I can type here. We can do simple calculations, equals 4 squared, and press enter. We'll get to all of that fairly soon in some subsequent screencasts, but I wanted to kind of give you an overview of what this looks like. This main area up here, this entire region is known as the ribbon. On the ribbon, you have what are known as tabs. So we have a File tab here, that's how we can save. I'll get to that in a moment. We have the Home tab that has a lot of important things. Insert, Draw, and so on. You'll learn what these different tabs do, primarily through experience and through screencasts. But let's go back to the Home tab. On the ribbon, in these various tabs, we have these groups. So you have the Font group, Alignment group, the Number group, and so on. And in each of these groups, we have what is known as a command button. Let me go ahead and click down into cell F12. Well, that's known as F12. In the alignment group, we have command buttons. So here is an align right. So if I, let me make this a little bit bigger. We can drag the cell to make it bigger. And now if I click on the command button for align right, you see that we align that label to the right. So there's all sorts of command buttons in these different groups. There's also something known as the Quick Access Toolbar. That's way up here at the top. You can customize it using this little drop-down menu. I'll show you a brief screencast on doing that later on. But right now, all we have in the Quick Access Toolbar, we have Save. So you can quickly save your worksheet. This arrow here is an undo. So you can undo once we've done something else. So let me just type in something equals 5 plus 4. If you undo, then this redo becomes available. So we can redo what we undid. I also wanted to show you how you can customize the view. So if I go to View tab here, and I'm going to go into Zoom, click on Zoom, and I just want to make this a little bit bigger. For many of my screencasts, I like to have this at 200% magnification. so you guys can all see what's going on. Let's get back to the ribbon. If you go way over here on the right, you can collapse the ribbon, and there's a shortcut key for that, Control F1. So if you want more space, you can always collapse the ribbon. It's available. Another couple of important anatomical features about Excel. This bar here, this is known as the formula bar. If you click on a cell and you type equal, all formulas in Excel start with an equal. You'll notice that up here, it's echoing that in something known as the formula bar. So 6 minus 2. It's echoed up here in the formula bar. So this is known as the formula bar. You press enter to input that formula. The status bar is way down here on the left, and right now it just says that we're ready. One quick thing about the status bar, if I put in 3 quick numbers there, and if I highlight those, then down here on the status bar on the lower right hand side, it'll tell me average, the count, and the sum of those 3 numbers that I've put into those boxes and that I've highlighted. This is known as a selections. A couple of other basic features in Excel. There's a difference between a left mouse click and a right mouse click. So if I left click, I can select cells like that. To make a selection, I can click and drag and then release the left mouse button. If you right click, so a lot of times when you right click on something, it'll bring up this context sensitive menu. Up at the top, we have this mini menu here where you can easily format things. So you don't actually have to go up here to the ribbon. You can highlight things straight from this mini bar. So I can, for example, fill that color yellow. Let's right click again, and we can do all sorts of different things. And you'll learn about these in a subsequent screencast. If you insert a chart, just as an example, without using the mouse, I can press Alt, and then insert is actually the N, so I can press N. It opens up that tab, and then now I can go over here to, let's just say Q, and it brings up those plots. And that's how you can use the keyboard to do a lot of the navigation. I tend not to do this. In fact, I never use this, but I know there are some people who like to do this. I wanted to first explain the difference between worksheets and workbooks. A workbook is this entire file that I am working in. So up here, I have not yet saved this. This would be book 2. Basic Excel files have extensions .xlsx. So this is our workbook. If you look down here on the lower left, these are sheets. So we have sheet 1 here. And we can go ahead and edit this. We can add in numbers if we'd like, and so on. This is our first sheet, and if we wanted to add a second sheet, we can always go down here, and we can click. We can left click on New Sheet, and that's how we can add a new sheet. In the previous screencast, I showed you how to zoom or change the magnification level, and I'm going to go ahead and do that to this sheet. So this is a second sheet. You can always rename this by right-clicking on a tab down there, and we can. So this is a second sheet. You can always rename this by right-clicking on a tab down there, and we can rename this if we like. So I can rename that, for example, data. If you'd like to hide a sheet, so sometimes I like to have information that's kind of behind the scenes that I don't want people to necessarily see. You can always right-click on that tab, and you can go here to hide. So I've hidden that sheet. Nobody knows it's there unless they right-click on any existing tab, and we do unhide, and then it asks us for which sheet do you want to unhide. So that's how we can unhide that data sheet. Let me just go over a few things that for most people are pretty intuitive. Excel has all these sheets again, and so each of these is known as a cell. We have these column headings and these row numbers. So this cell, this is known as the active cell, that's C2. You always put the letter before the number or the column before the row. The spreadsheet is organized into columns. So if I click up here, that's the entire A column, the entire B column, and so on. And let me just show you how many different columns we have. So if I click on A1 and I do Control right arrow, it goes all the way to the rightmost column in Excel. And we have X, F, D. To delve more into these columns, so I'm going to go Control left arrow. If I scroll down here, if I press on this right arrow, and let's just go A through Z. Once we get to Z, we go AA. So now A is used with A, then we go AB, AC, and so on. So if I go all the way to AZ, then it starts to do BA, BB, and so on. And now I'm back to cell A1. Same thing, we have a lot of rows here, and they start with 1, and if I do Control down, go all the way down to the bottom of column A. And we have 1,048,576 different rows. It's unlikely that you're going to use all of those rows, but they're there if you need them. Let's do Control up to get back to cell A1. Computer, let's go ahead and open up a file called Practice Numbers. This is what the Practice Numbers file looks like. We have two sheets, Sheet 1 and Sheet 2, and they have slightly different numbers on them. The first thing I'm going to show you is how we can resize columns and rows. It's not common to resize rows, but it is quite common to resize columns. To resize columns, we can go up here. You notice that if I go between B and C, the cursor changes from a down arrow to sort of this left-right bar there. So if I left-click on there and I go left and right, that's how I can change the size or width of that column. A lot of times you'll want to resize your column based upon what data you have. The default, by the way, is 8.47. So that's one way. Another way we can do this is I can click on any cell. So for example, if I want to click on B3 and I want to make that bigger, you can go up here on the Home tab in the Cells grouping here, and you can do Format, and we can do Column Width, and then you can manually put in something. So let's say I wanted that to be 20, and press Enter. So it resizes that entire column. I'm going to go ahead and press Control Z to get back to what I had previously. That's how you can resize columns. If you wanted to, you can resize rows by doing the same thing, dragging up and down, or going up here to Format Row Height. To auto-fit cells to their contents, you can go up here and you can double-click on the border, and that automatically sizes that column. I'm going to do Control Z or undo to get it back to where we were. If you want to do multiple columns at the same time, you can highlight all of those, and then just on one of the cell borders, you can double-click, and it resizes those to fit their contents. Now, a lot of times I just like to keep it the default width, unless I have really long labels or if I'm doing something unique. Sometimes you will want to add or insert a column. If that's the case, if you want to add an entire row, you can go over here to, if you want to add a entire row, you can go over here to the left bar here, and you can right-click on the number 4, and now we're going to insert a row above the selected row. So I do that, and it shifts those cells down, and it's squeezed in an entire new row. I'm going to go ahead and do Control Z. That's undo, or you can go up here to the upper left and click this button. If you wanted to insert a cell just in column C, you can click on that 10, and I can right-click, insert, and it's going to ask us, do you want to insert by shifting the cells down or to the right? So that means the pre-existing cells down or to the right. So I'm going to go ahead and select down in this case. So it inserted an entire new cell right there. It didn't insert an entire row, just one cell, and it shifted those 2 cells down. Let's go ahead. Let me show you what delete does. If you wanted to delete an entire row, let's say I wanted to delete the second row of my array there, I can right-click on row 3, and I can do delete, and it deletes the entire row. Control Z to get us back to where we were. If you want to delete a cell and shift everything up, or down, or left or right, you can click on that cell, right-click, delete, and it asks us, do you want to delete by shifting cells up, left, or do you want to delete the entire row or the entire column? I'm going to go ahead and shift cells up. So when I click that, it deleted the 18, and everything else on the spreadsheet in column C went up 1 cell. Insert and delete. You can also insert multiple rows by highlighting, for example, 3 rows over here. So I left, for example, 3 rows over here. So I left click and drag down to the 6th row. Excel recognizes that I have 3 rows I want to insert, and then I just right click, insert, and it inserts 3 at once. Control Z. You can do all of that with columns too. So I could insert 1 column there, Control Z. You can insert 2 columns by highlighting first 2 columns, and then insert from the menu when I right click, and that's how you can insert columns. A lot of times you will want to format your Excel worksheet. We talked about cell formatting and something known as conditional formatting. I'll be using this practicenumbers.xlsx file to kind of show you some of the basics of cell formatting. So by default, you can just type into a cell and the font is Calibri and the size is 11. So if you want to change that, you can go up here. You can select from this drop down the size, so you can make it really big if you wanted to. Alternatively, you can type in, so you can type in 16. You can also change the font type over here, so you can change it to one of these other ones. You can make it bold. You can make it italicized if you'd like. You can underline, and so on. There's also a way to add borders. So if we highlight this entire selection of cells and I go up here in the font group, you can add borders. You could add right borders. So that added a right border to that block of cells. You can't really see it that well, but it's over here on the right. You can add all borders by doing the same thing. You can increase the size, so you can go down here to line color if you want to change the line color, line style, so maybe you want to make that a lot thicker. You can change that, and that actually brings up this pencil, and then you can kind of draw in where you'd like to put those bold lines. So if you press escape, you can get back to the kind of this plus sign cursor, and let's highlight this again. You can, if you want to remove all the borders, you can select no border. You can highlight cells by doing this drop down. So maybe we want to make them all green. Maybe you just want to make one of them blue, and so on. You can change the font color. So you can click in a cell, and over here you can drop down from this little menu here, different colors. So let's just go ahead and make that a nice red. You can also change the alignment of your cells. So maybe you want to left justify everything. So you can click over here on align left. You can also align in the middle, so you can center. And if you want, you can play around with these various formatting command buttons. A lot of times you'll write something in a cell like this is a very long label, and you don't want it to spill over. See how it's spilling over to the left and right? You can go ahead and click on that. Right now this is centered, but we can left center it if you'd like. And you can click up here to this ABC little command button, and you can wrap the text. So what it does, it keeps the column the same width, but what it does is it increases the rows so that you can kind of wrap that label. Another common thing to do is to combine or merge cells. To merge cells, you can select multiple cells, and you go up here to this drop-down menu, and you have 4 different options. The most common is just the default one. So if I merge that, this is actually merge and center, then I can type in perhaps a label there, and that's, we've merged 3 of those cells, and now we have a single cell. So this is actually a single cell. The reference of this is always the upper leftmost cell. So see how in the name box, this cell, even though it spans B1 to D1, is really now known as B1 because that's the upper leftmost cell. It doesn't have to be a single row. You can merge, let's say, those 6 cells by merging and center. You can type in a label there. If you wanted to center that label in the middle, so vertically center it, you can always go up here into the alignment and click on middle align, and that kind of brings it into the middle. If you want to undo a merged set of cells, you can always go into here and you can do unmerge. Whatever is in that single merged set of cells will always go to the upper left of the remaining when you unmerge. So that label went up in here to the upper leftmost cell. If you decide that you want to remove all your formatting, you can highlight the cells of which you'd like to remove formatting. You can go up here in the Home tab, in the Styles group, and you can just select Cell Styles, and you can just select Normal, and it'll get rid of all the formatting. And then if you want to unmerge, again, these cells are merged right now. You can always go up here and unmerge the cells. Now I'm going to show you how we can conditionally format cells. This is quite useful if you're trying to visualize various data. I'm going to go here to Sheet 2 on this practice numbers file, and I'm just going to highlight these. Up here on the Home tab in the Styles group, we have Conditional Formatting. I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and if you want, you can experiment around with these, but let's go ahead and do color scales. If you just click on the default over here, the leftmost, then what it does is it kind of compares everything that was in that original selection. It sort of compares with one another, and the high values it makes green, and the low ones it makes red. You can always go in here into conditional formatting after you've set a conditional formatting rule. You can go down here and manage rules, and then you can edit this rule. So maybe you wanted to adjust this. Right now it's saying the lowest value in that selection is red and the highest value is green. and the 50th percentile, which is the midpoint, is yellow. So maybe you wanted to change this. You want to change it to blue. You could do that, and that's how you can change the conditional formatting rules. So there's all sorts of conditional formatting rules. Let me just show you another example of conditional formatting. Maybe you had a couple of people, these are elves actually, or dwarves, and Snow White. Maybe they take some quiz and you want to evaluate graphically or visually their performance. So you can highlight that. You can go up here to conditional formatting. Maybe you want data bars. So this kind of shows little bar charts within the cells that have those numbers, and you can kind of use that to visualize things. Let's go ahead and look at some of these others. There's icon sets in here. Maybe you want to identify the ones that passed. Maybe an 8 and above is passing. Maybe you want to identify the intermediate values and the failing dwarves. So you could select as indicators. You can always go back, conditional formatting, and we can manage the rules. And if you wanted to edit this, you could change. So maybe instead of a percent, right now it's showing you're going to be a green check mark if the value is 67% of essentially the range between minimum and maximum. But maybe you want to change this instead of a percent to a number, both of these. So when the value is greater than or equal to 8, we want to make it a green checkbox, and you can select different things here if you'd like, different icons. When you do that, you notice that it says the next one is when it's less than 8, and now you can specify maybe greater than 5. And then the last one, if you click away, it says we're going to give a red X when it's less than 5. And that's how you can sort of customize your icons. I would strongly encourage you to experiment around with these different highlighting rules and conditional formatting rules and the icon sets. If you do decide that you want to eliminate or clear all those rules, you can always do clear rules either from the selected cells or from the entire sheet. Hope you learned a little bit more about cell formatting and conditional formatting. Excel is quite smart. There's something known as auto-fill. So let me just put in something that's quite common by putting in the month here. Now, if you click in that cell and you go down here to the lower right, you see that empty, bigger plus sign goes into this smaller, solid plus sign. That's known as the fill handle. So if I take that and I left click and I drag, you see that below here it's recognizing that this is a commonly filled series, commonly used series, the months, and it says February, and I can do March, April, and so on. So if you release the left mouse button, then it puts those months into those cells. So that's known as auto-fill. You can do the same thing going down. So if I had January, you can use the fill handle on the lower right, and you can drag, and it recognizes that you would like to auto-fill that series. What about numbers? So if I put in a 1, and I want to fill this 1, 2, 3, and so on. So I'm going to click on that 1, go down to the fill handle, and we're going to drag down. Now, unfortunately, there are a lot of things in Excel where it doesn't immediately recognize that as an autofill series, But for some things, you can press the Control button while you're holding that fill handle down. So I'm going to press the Control button, and then we go back and forth, and the Control button kind of forces it into doing an autofill, especially on things that are commonly filled in. If you're curious what series are typically available for autofill, you can always go up here to File, Options, and then in the Advanced area over here, if you scroll down to General, which is kind of near the bottom, and you go to Edit Custom Lists, this is what is available as autofill list. In a minute, I'll talk about how you can make custom lists. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel, and click cancel again. Sometimes it'll recognize, it'll be smart. So if I put in student 1, then if I drag down, it's recognizing that I want to put in a series, and it'll automatically add that. So it's kind of interesting that it won't do that for just 1, but it will do that for student. I'm going to start at 10, and we want to go down, and we want to increase by 10 every time. Another way to do this is just to start with your first value. Go up here to the Home tab, and if you go into Editing, there's a little fill, so we can click on Fill. We want to make a series. We want this to be in a column, not a row. You can make it in a row if you'd like, but I'm going to show this with columns. Our step value is going to be 10, and we're going to make a series until we're at 100. And then I click OK. That's not quite as fast as putting 10 and 20, highlighting those two, and just quickly dragging down to 100. But sometimes if you have a really big list, the fill series might be a little more efficient. You can also create fill series that are growth trends. So maybe we want to double. We want to double every time, so it'll go 1, 2, 4, 8, and so on. You can click over here in Editing, Fill. It's going to be a series. Now this is going to be also in a column. It's not linear, but it's a growth series. We're going to step it by a factor of 2. That means we're multiplying by 2 every time. And maybe we want to go up to something like 128. So we're doubling 1, 2, 4, 8, and so on. So there's a couple different options in that fill series. Excel has a bunch of different formats for numbers, currency, dates, and times. Some of them are particularly confusing, especially dates and times. But I'm going to kind of show you the basics of these different formatting options that are available in Excel. Before I get started with some specific examples, I wanted to kind of just show you where and how you can access these different formatting options. Here in the Home tab in the Number group, you've got this General drop-down menu. This is where you can find all of the different types of formatting options. So let me just go through kind of some of the more popular formats for different cells in Excel. First of all, you can just type in a label like this. We can type in numbers here. If I just type in 8.23, that's going to be recognized as a number. Numbers are sort of right-centered, and text is left-centered. If you wanted to specifically specify cell C5 as a number, you can go in here and specify it as a number. You can also decrease and increase the decimal of a number by going up here and using these increase decimal and decrease decimal command buttons. So I could decrease, for example, to get it to 8.2, or maybe all you want to show is the ones digit there, which is 8. So I can increase the decimal by clicking to the left. We can also put in really big numbers, 34,872, for example. The default of that is not to have commas, but if you want commas, you can always go ahead and click the comma style. And when you do that, it added those 2 trailing zeros, and let's just go ahead and decrease the decimal because we don't have any information there. So depending upon what your application is, you can tailor the different numbers however you want. There's also percentages. If we put in a fraction like 0.54 and you want to convert that to a percentage, you can go ahead and click up here, percentage, and that's 54%. There's scientific notation notation in here. For some of you, you might be working with really big numbers. We can go ahead and convert that by using this drop-down list to scientific notation. It always gives you a preview there. So if I click on scientific, it'll be 3.49e plus 0.4. So some of you know what the E is. I would encourage you to play around with some of these different formatting options. Another one is currency that's typically used by business and finance folks. So if I had $10.54 in there, if you wanted to make this currency, you could click up here on currency. There's also accounting. So I'm going to go ahead and click on currency. Currency and accounting are very similar. If I click on this and assign this dollar sign, that makes it accounting. Accounting puts the dollar sign all the way to the left. Let's make this a currency. And see how the dollar signs don't line up? If we put in another item here, maybe $1.23, and we make that accounting, then the dollar signs line up, and it always makes the decimal points line up. Also, you can have negative $5.43 if I convert that to currency, but in accounting, if you have a negative number, negative $67.12, we convert that to accounting, then it always puts the negative value in parentheses. So negative dollar amounts in accounting are enclosed with parentheses. One of the most important things to understand before you get started with doing things in Excel is to understand the referencing modes. In Excel, there are 3 cell addressing modes. There's the relative referencing mode, there's absolute referencing, and then there's mixed cell referencing. And I'm going to go through examples of all 3 of those in this screencast. So I'm over here in Excel. I'm going to go ahead and put in a couple numbers here. I'm going to put in 4.3 and negative 2.1. First of all, what is a cell reference? Well, this cell that has 4.3, is known as A2 because it's in column A. This is column A, and it's in row 2. This entire row is row 2. So sort of the crossing of column A with row 2 is known as cell A2. This other cell here below A2 is known as A3. So those are the cell addresses. We have A2 and A3. We use these various cell addresses in formulas. For example, I can write here in cell B2, I can reference by either directly typing in A2 on the keyboard, or you can point and click over here to cell A2, and I'm just going to take that to the 3rd power. You'll learn a little bit more about what these different types of things are, how to exponentiate, multiply, divide, subtract, and add in some subsequent screencasts, but this caret here just denotes exponentiation. So I'm taking cell A2 and taking it to the 3rd power, or cubing it. And then when I press enter, we make that a permanent number here. That's the result. I can always go back into a cell to see what formula is in that cell by double-clicking. By the way, you can always press escape to get out of there, or you can go up here to the formula bar and you can click in there to see what formula is in cell B2. Now this reference here, if I double-click in here, this A2 is known as a relative reference. If I take this cell, B2, and I copy, so what I'm doing here is I'm going down to the lower right corner here, the big empty plus sign becomes kind of this smaller solid plus sign in the lower right hand corner of the cell that's highlighted. So if I click there, if I left click and drag, so hold that and drag down, I can copy that formula down. And you notice that this is now a different number. I didn't take the value in cell B2, I took the formula and copied it down. So let's go ahead and double click into cell B3, and now you see that the A2 that was in cell B2 has changed to A3 that's in cell B3. That's because the A2 in cell B2 is known as a relative reference. When I type the formula into cell B2, I reference the cell that was just left of it. So one column over on the same row. So when you drag that down, It's also, so now my cell is B3, and I'm referencing the cell that's just one to the left on the same row. So that's known as a relative reference. So I'm going to go ahead and clear the contents here. You can do that using the delete button, or you can right click and do clear contents. And instead, I'm going to double click in here, and I'm going to put my cursor right in the middle of the A and the 2, and I'm going to press F4. So F4 key. The F4 key, once it puts these dollar signs on to the left of A and to the left of 2. Whenever you have a dollar sign in front of either the column letter or the row number, that means it's an absolute reference. I like to think of the dollar signs as thumbtacks. So thumbtacks before it means you're sort of pinning it, making it an absolute reference. Let's also press F4 a couple more. Let's press it once more, and you see that now there's only a dollar sign in front of the row, and I can press it again. Now it's just in front of the column. These are known as mixed cell addresses, and then I can press F4 again, and it goes back to a completely relative reference. So you can kind of toggle through using the F4 button. So let's leave it at the fully absolute reference, $A, $2. You can also manually type in the dollar signs if you want. And now I'm going to press enter. Now I'm going to take that formula in cell B2 and I'm going to drag down like we did before. Let's go ahead and double click in there. Now you notice instead of bringing that cell down, and instead of having A3 cubed, we have A2 cubed, because A2, when we type that into cell B2, this is an absolute reference. We've thumbtacked or made those references absolute, so wherever we take that formula, I can even do Control-C and paste it somewhere else over here. So let's talk about what a mixed address is. I've typed in 10, 4, -7, and 13 into cells D2, E2, D3, and E3. Now what I'm going to do in cell F2, I'm going to type in the following formula, and when I press return or enter, you should see that that equals 14. Alright, so that's pretty straightforward. We're adding D2 to E2. However, if we look at the references, these are known as mixed references because only one of either the column or the row is absolute and the other is relative. So we have D $2, that's making the row always going to be row 2. In the second one, we have $E2, that makes it's always going to be column E. And now what we're going to do is right click on this and do copy. And then we're going to go down to G3 and I'm going to do right click paste here. And we get 17. When we double click here, you see that the reference is E $2 plus $E3. So let's take a look back. In our F2 formula, this D2, we're going down one row and over one column. So the D2, if the D2 were just fully relative, then D2 would become E3, right? But since we're pinning the 2, the D, when we go over one column, becomes an E because that's a relative reference. But the $2, when we go down one row, doesn't become 3, it remains $2. So D $2, when we go down one row, over one column, becomes E $2. And you can see that here, we have E $2. The $E2, when we go down one row and over one column, if this were fully relative, that is just an E2 with no $, it would become F3. But since we pinned or made the E an absolute reference, the E is never going to change regardless of how far over we go. So the $E remains a $E, but the 2, we go down one row and that becomes a 3. So that becomes $E and 3. So that's known as a mixed address. So you'll get a lot more experience with these types of referencing modes as we work through other examples. The example I'm going to be working through here first is in a file called savings.xlsx. It's just a simple equation here where we have a principal amount, that's the amount that you invest in a bank. We have an interest rate I, and we're investing for
years. So let's just put in some data here. Maybe we invest $200 at an interest rate of 5% for 10 years. By the way, if I wanted to change this to a percent, you can always go up here and change it to percent. Now, in a previous screencast, you should have learned about absolute and relative cell referencing. You should have learned that we can make absolute references by clicking on a cell and pressing the F4 key to make it completely absolute, or you can toggle to make it mixed addresses and back to relative. Now, the best way to work in Excel is to name absolute references. If we have constants or values in here that are never going to change, then it's best practice to name them. So, for example, I'm going to name this a variable called P, because that is the variable name. It's the principal. The easiest way to name single variables is to go up here. There's this box up here in the upper left called the name box. So if I want to name that value in cell C5, if I want to name that capital P, I can just type capital P and press enter. And if I use that variable any other places on the worksheet, I can type in equals P, and you see that P, capital P, is an absolute reference that always refers to cell C5. I can use that named variable in a mathematical formula. I'm going to do the same thing for interest and N, the number of years. So I'm just going to click in cell C6, I'm going to put in variable I, and I'm going to do the same thing for C7. That's going to be lowercase n, and you see that those are all named now. By the way, if you're anywhere in a worksheet and you want to know which cell corresponds to a named variable, you can just type in to the name box something like capital P as just an example, and it'll go to that cell. Now, in the cell here, in cell C9, I'm going to put a formula, just this formula up here to calculate S. And you'll learn more about syntax in the next week. We put in here equals P times 1 plus I, and you see that instead of using cell addresses, we're using these name variables. And then I'm going to take it to the power of n, and you see that it's color-coded here, and we see the corresponding cells where P, I, and N are defined. So then I can press enter, and it does that calculation. So that means after 10 years at 5% interest, $200 will become about $325. Let me real quick show you how to edit. So if you want to change the names, let's say I wanted to, instead of N, I wanted to change that to maybe NY, then you can always go up here to the Formulas tab, and there's something called the Name Manager. And we can go into here and we can edit the values. So I can select on N, and we can edit that, and maybe now you want to change that to NY for the number of years. Alternatively, maybe you messed up the cell reference here, and you can change the cell reference that NY is referring to. And then we can click OK, and then we can click OK, we can click Close down here. So that's how you can edit values. I'm going to actually change this back to N. I'm going to go to the Name Manager, and I'm going to delete the names. You can hold down the Shift key, you can click on the last one, and I'm just going to delete these. And I'm going to close. I wanted to show you how we can define multiple variables all at once. So if you've got them kind of in columns here, or different rows for the variables, you can highlight all of those, and then I can go up here to the Formulas tab, Create from Selection, and it'll automatically detect the names in the left of the values. And so most times you can just press OK, and when we do that, you see that if I click on this cell in the name box that's been named P, this has been named I, and this has been named N. Now there are some names that you cannot use. Let's say I had R, and I wanted to name this R. If you go up here and you try to name that R, it actually highlights the entire row. So R in Excel is already reserved for rows. You can't name something R. There are other stipulations on variables that you cannot use as names, but if you have an R, oftentimes I like to call that R underscore or RR, but you cannot use R. So I'm going to name that R underscore.